All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. As I've been working through my New Jersey-centric series of videos, I've been getting contacted by various people with suggestions of guys and gals I should reach out to from the early 80s and forward. And one name has just been consistently coming up in recent times. And as someone I've known online, never in this context, so I'm excited. But my guest is somebody who's been on the top of the list for many people, so I figured it was time to bring him on. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Peter Aaron. Peter, man, good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me on, Joel. And it makes me feel good that I'm on the top of somebody's list,
Right on, right on. Excellent.
and it's a positive list. So
Yes, yes, absolutely. There were a lot of people who were saying, "Hey, why haven't you talked to Peter yet?" So
I'm very flattered. Thank you.
absolutely, man. And for those of you who may be watching who are familiar with Peter's music, including the band the CRANKS, which we'll get into quite a bit, his work in Ohio as a concert promoter back in the 80s, may be wondering why he's on a series devoted to New Jersey. Well, to clear that up first and foremost, for those who are unaware, Peter, you're from Morris County, New Jersey originally, correct?
I am, yeah. I was born in Connecticut. I was born in Torrington, but my folks moved. I was first of three kids. My folks moved to Morris County about a year after I was born. My dad got a job down there uh, with the Dresser Industries, which was a industrial sales situation. So yeah, so oh, this is Misty here,
Hello, Misty.
and Frankie, my her brother, is around somewhere. Uh, yeah, there you go. So yeah, that's yeah. I I'm from New Jersey originally, I would say.
Cool. Now, when and how did music kind of enter the picture for you to where you eventually get into actually, being someone who goes to shows and of course have a career in music yourself?
Wow, yeah, it's kind of an unlikely, sort of interesting, well, hopefully it's interesting, but to me it seems like it's unlikely story was, when I was a kid, uh, my dad bought the Monkees' first album for me when it came out in 1966, and that combined with the TV show, really, you know, kind of grabbed me and entranced me. Peter Tork was my favorite monkey, go figure. Um, and kind of after that, music didn't. I was more interested in history, especially military history, and music didn't really speak to me too much. I mean, I sort of passively was interested in Kiss a little bit, just because that's what boys our age did. Um, but didn't I didn't really connect with music until punk. I mean, I kind of liked some of the classic rock stuff that was all, what we listened to in junior high school and high school, and but that kind of always still felt like big kids music to me. It didn't really feel like it had anything much to really do with me. And then when with punk, like, especially the first thing was seeing Elvis Costello on Saturday Night Live in 1977. That was I refer to that as the great hinge of my life, because it was sort of like, wow, I'm a nerd, and this guy looks like a nerd. He doesn't look like somebody out of Styx or Foreigner or whatever, and he's also very pissed off and getting right up in the camera. And so the next like that week, I went out and bought his first album, and then the Ramones and the Pistols and Devo and everything after that. I mean, some of this, I would catch peeks at Cream magazine when I was in 7-Eleven, and those would get passed around in school. So I was kind of learning about some of this stuff. And then you just, Yeah, you would hear some things to some degree on the commercial FM stations. Um, but I didn't know about the college stations and at that point. So, it was maybe the process of like finding out about the music and connecting with it and uh identifying with it as something that I felt like spoke to me. Um, that was powerful, and that's really where I kind of really got into things. And then of course that was in 77, 78, and which I was about 14. I'm 60 now. Uh, it was still, I didn't play an instrument, and it wasn't really. It was still people that were a little bit older than me. I didn't know how to get to New York or find Max's Kansas City or anything. I found out within a couple of years after that. But it wasn't until hardcore where it was something happening that I could really directly be a part of. And that started with uh, getting to be friends with Paul Schraft, who's in Montville High School with me, and Mark Lombardi, uh, known as Monk. Um, and we started Sand in the Face, and that was just 19. It was like very tail end of 79 into 80, 1980. Um, and we started out kind of like trying to play Ramones songs and Devo songs and Wild Thing or whatever. And but then when we discovered Noise the Show, Tim Summer Show on NYU, which was called Oi the Show when we started listening to it on WNYU. That really opened up this whole world of finding out about the early hardcore stuff, and then all our songs had to get really fast after that, you know. So, and we played in my folks' basement for damn near 2 years before we played out. Probably a little bit more.
Where were some of the places that you would play back then when you hit the ground running as a live thing?
The first shows, um, we were talking about this before we started the recording. I mean, I only was able to play a few shows with Sand in the Face before my family moved out of state, and I had to leave the band. The first show was at the Montville Community Center, which was my mom worked there, so I think that had something to do with us getting in there. And we played with the local heavy metal cover band. Um, because there was no other bands around, especially hardcore bands in that area. When we started, we didn't know that there were any other hardcore bands in New Jersey, actually, until we heard Adrenaline OD on Noise the Show, and then we heard that they were from New Jersey. Um, so we didn't even, and then we started meeting people, going to shows. But in getting back to your question, the community center, and then we played the Show Place in Dover and the Dirt Club. And then that was only, we're talking like just less than a handful of shows before, I had to leave the scene.
Right, because you were still underage at that point. So when your family left, you kind of had to go with them.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I fought it and tried to sweet talk my parents into some scheme of living, with some, one of my friends' families, which, I don't think my friends' families would have been too hot on that either, you know. So, so yeah, I mean, I was kind of, it was a culture shock going from basically a suburb of New York City to still the biggest city in Ohio, but still a city in Ohio.
Hmm.
But right when I got there, I found out where the scene was and started meeting people and kind of, found my tribe, my family, my chosen family out there. And and a year later, just about a year later, I went back to New Jersey and I looked, I got together with with Paul and Sand in the Face had Paul from Sand in the Face, and they had a different lineup at that point. But just the overall sense I had having that distance was it kind of really drilled home the idea that it meant more to be punk rock in Ohio than it did in I won't say New Jersey, but the New York metropolitan area. You know, I mean, you were really, you know, obviously very much more behind the times out there, and we would drive to see shows because not that many bands came through Cincinnati area at that point. So you drive to Indianapolis or Columbus, Ohio, or I remember going to see DeKreutzen in the base. It was the for the tour for Cows and Beer EP, their first record, and it was in the basement of a church in a town in Indiana called Columbus, which was basically in the middle of like cornfield, like farmland area. And Monk from Sand in the Face was out visiting me, and he was just like, "You got to be kidding! Like you're driving 3 hours from Cincinnati through farmlands to go see a punk rock show." And that kind of thing just it really showed that the whole DIY thing was, the rugged individualism or whatever, um, you didn't take it for granted so much. It meant more to find other people and connect with other, like-minded people and help make things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get deep into Ohio and those fields, I want to mention Sand in the Face. There is material out that you recorded with them. It came out, I guess, about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Compilation of the 82, 83 recordings. I believe it's called Music to Riot.
Music made to riot.
Music Made to Riot. So that's out there. Sand in the Face went on for quite a few years. There's an album they put out, 85, 86, I want to say. And then towards the late 80s, a recent, not so recent guest, but a guest on this channel, Lenny from Bio Records, was the drummer for a bit. So they went on and did their thing for quite a while. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so you're out in Ohio, different environment. And eventually, perhaps, relatively soon, you start getting involved in promoting shows out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, there's a whole phase that kind of happened before that started. Well, I moved to Cincinnati right before my senior year of high school. So I did my last year of high school out there. And then I went to college in Boston. I went to BU and I was there from 83 to 85. So I was kind of deep in the scene I mean, most of my friends I spent more time at the Rat and the Channel than I did on campus. I mean, most of my friends up there were punk scene people and not, some of them were also BU students, but circle was a lot bigger than that. So I was there. I was in Boston during a pretty great time and saw a lot of great shows and Boston more and more hits me what a fantastic town it was for music because the punk scene there was built on very strong 60s garage rock scene and that a lot of that uh a lot of that sound and that feeling and aesthetic carried through into what was happening in the 80s. It kind of gave it its own sort of like maybe a deeper flavor than a lot of other cities would have had for the punk scene there. So I was there my freshman year, 83 into 84. I came home for the summer, and that summer of 84, I played bass in Sluggo, which was the first hardcore band in Cincinnati.
Hmm.
Uh, Great archival album of Sluggo material came out a couple years ago, also uh, on the 4Q HQ label. And that's a really nice package. I would encourage people to go out and find that. I'm on one side of that record. Um, and just stepping back a little bit before that, Sand in the Face, the Music Made to Riot anthology was a record that I put together, um, including mainly material that I played on. Um, so anyway, I went back to college, 84 to 85. I came home, I decided I didn't want to, college wasn't for me. Although I went back and took courses here and there in successive years. And had been doing a fanzine. I started a fanzine out there. And I also got involved in radio. I was on a local community radio station, a member supported station, WAIF, which is still going strong and very much a vital cultural force. And I was also on WVXU, which was it was an NPR affiliate, but it was the station of Xavier University, which is a Jesuit school. And I started getting contacted by labels and underground bands that were coming through the area, and we're looking for gigs, and no one was booking the bands I wanted to see. So I just kind of took it upon myself and started working with a couple different partners, and that was in. Yeah, 80s. I worked, I got a job working in the promotions department of the main club in town, which is a club called Bogarts. And through that, we'd also get approached by underground bands that were not big enough to play that club. And so I worked with a couple different partners, and that was just starting in 1986. And from 1986 until about 1989, 90. I booked shows at, three or four different clubs. So, I was booking like Nirvana on their first couple tours till, originally the first show, there was like 25, 30 people there. Um, White Zombie, uh, Flaming Lips, I built up very, from a small club level in town, very big. And actually did book Killing Joke on I can't remember which record it was, but this would have been, yeah, 1988 or so, 87, somewhere around there. I booked one of Big Black's, like their second to last show that they ever did. Not counting they did a one-off reunion,
Right,
yeah,
right.
later on. But so yeah, I mean that, and I was like, almost every night of the week I was working the door and supervising the load in, and you know, by day I'd wake up in the afternoon and be on the phone with booking agents and go out flyering, and you know and I ended up meeting a lot of people from a lot of touring bands. Jerry Teal later in the Cranks with, who was in the Honeymoon Killers, and Bob Burt when he was in Pussy Galore at that point. Um, so yeah, that kind of led to a lot of other things, and we felt like we're fighting against the tide, and in a small Midwestern city, very much ahead of the curve with a lot of the sub pop and amphetamine reptile bands and all that. But it seemed like in the end, it left a good lasting impression on the scene there and helped the culture. So
Well, let's stay on that for a second because you're referring to like mid to late 80s. And,
yeah.
by 87, even though I was only 10 years old at the time, I
Mhm.
was sneaking downstairs at night, going to the radio in the kitchen, going left to the dial to hear college radio. I was sneaking down watching the early incarnations of 120 Minutes, So I was hearing all these bands with weird names I had never heard of prior. But before that, I was a Bon Jovi Stadium kid. which I still am. But I was learning about these bands as they were coming up, and like I remember when Nirvana was just sort of like bubbling. Um, and obviously we know what happened, the
Yeah.
90s and everything just went bang.
Yeah.
But because you were so in the thick of it, you were doing radio, you were promoting, you were meeting these bands as they were coming through. Did you get a sense at that time, like, wow, this is something's going to happen here? Like, this is building to something. Or is it only in hindsight you realize, wow, these characters would go on to do these culturally significant things?
Yeah, no, no, not at all, man. I mean, we had no, there was never any thought of like that this is going to be something that's going to get above the underground, that it's going to, that anyone besides our little kind of rarefied strata is going to give a shit about it at all. I definitely remember the moment when there was this place that was kind of like a new wave disco called Beat Club. It was the name of like one night at a kind of a frat pickup bar. And we would go there to meet girls and everything. And even though the music was like kind of not really our thing, they played a lot of like, I don't know what was, Flock of Seagulls or whatever, that kind of like, commercial MTV new wave stuff. But then one night they played "Smells Like Teen Spirit," and there's this disco strobe lights like they always had happen, and people were dancing, you know, and that moment was like, oh, wow, like, this has gone to like, a, a much higher level, Um, yeah, so it was just so. I mean, the music at that music at the time was just in such bold relief against the like slick like pastel neon crap that that was just what the predominant uh feeling yeah, as far as what was happening in most of the music world. So yeah, I mean but yeah, I mean in some ways looking back, okay, like it was time for a change, and that stuff had, the slick stuff had jumped the shark, and there was people that were wanted something more, something edgier and more authentic that reflected, you know, the feelings that they had, and instead of this sort of pacifying uh upwardly mobile, like, Reagan era, soundtrack music. So in some ways you could sort of see how it was going to happen, but it still, it still blows my mind that, and Smells Like Teen Spirit. I mean, as pervasive as that song is, I mean, I still think it's great. I still love to hear it, I mean, I still, you know, I mean, when it comes on, I mean, I don't have the record myself, but there's no need for it. But I mean, uh, so yeah, it was not expected, man. I mean, even the Flaming Lips. I mean, obviously they're changed, stylistically too. But I mean, all these bands slept on my floor, I mean, just and those guys, like they lived literally like lived in the same clothes like for whole tours at a time without washing them, and just like, you know, driving around with their lighting rig that they ran with foot pedals and in their van and put up themselves. I mean, it's you could not have predicted it. It was all, no one was doing it with that in mind. They were doing with some they were do what they were doing, the music, that kind of music, because they wanted an antidote to the stuff that was getting shoved at them. I mean, of course, everybody, you know, would, the idea of doing it and being able to make a living from it, like, that was certainly a welcome thing, I think, for everybody. But there was never any oh, if we just do this, we'll get, you know, we'll be, uh, guaranteed, the
And,
brass ring,
and in a way, I think that served the music well because it wasn't created with the intent of being a commercially viable option.
Sure.
It just kind of became a happy accident.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember because I was really into the whole arena rock thing and the big production and the big drums and the big choruses. And then I'm watching MTV like 1 o'clock in the morning as a kid. Sorry, mom and dad. Here comes Kim Gordon sitting on a train, Shadow of a Doubt video, grainy, you know, looks like it was shot in, someone's backyard, or whatever. The production is not bombastic, it's kind of subtle, and there's a lot. And Kim wasn't Debbie Gibson, the different
Yeah.
singer. And I'm like, well, what is this? This is like totally stripped down, completely free of the gloss and what was clearly the commercial route at that point. And then fast forward a handful of years later, and they're on Letterman, Sonic Youth,
Yeah.
and the whole thing changed.
Yeah.
Um, but when you were out there doing your thing in Ohio, am I correct? That's when you crossed paths initially with William Weber, who plays in.
Yeah. Yeah. William had been in a lot of bands in Cincinnati before we started playing together, and then he actually went to Berkeley School of Music twice. Dropped out twice, but he was in Boston at the same time that I was, I guess, in my sophomore year. Um, but we didn't know each other that well then. Um, we kind of really started to connect when I got back after I was settled back in Cincinnati, and we were in a couple other bands before the Cranks
Mhm.
started. But that was 1988 when the Cranks started. And we were a little bit different stylistically early on. And early on, the first lineup with that name, I wasn't the singer. We were a two guitar, no bass band, and with a different singer. Uh, but it wasn't coming out the way that I was visualizing things in my head, although I was still kind of really trying to figure out exactly but I just knew it didn't feel right. And it kind of took it upon myself to, okay, I guess I'm gonna have to be the singer and the focal point. Um, but yeah, I met William and we were a couple different bands before. The scenes obviously was very small at that point. So
And start of the next decade, you guys decide to bring it over to New York City and relocate.
right, yeah, William, we'd kind of started. We played a couple shows in Cincinnati. Really, we did one. Our very first show was opening for Pussy Galore, which is of course ironic because Bob Burt ended up becoming the drummer for the Cranks later. We played our first show, full show was opening for them, and then we played some tribute night things where we did one cover song, a couple different things, but um. Yeah, I'm trying to think of how. Well, what happened was that we started playing out, and then William decided he wanted to go to production school in New York. And so he moved up and he was subletting his sister's apartment. And then he said to me, yeah, well, I was thinking maybe we start the band up there. And I was resistant to it at first because I thought like, well, New York, you're just going to be one of a million bands up there. Cincinnati's yeah, maybe a slower, more out of the way town, but we could be a big fish in a small pond. The thing was in Cincinnati, we just couldn't find the right people to play with.
Mm.
And so William moved up. I followed him up a few months later. That was March in 1992, and that was right. I stayed in touch with the Honeymoon Killers and Pussy Galore and White Zombie, all the bands I knew in New York, and the Honeymoon Killers are basically breaking up just as I got to town, and so you know, I we asked Jerry if he'd want to play bass, and he was into it. And then, we started looking for drummers. And while we were looking for drummers, uh, a demo that we'd recorded, um, we dropped off a copy to PCP Entertainment, late record label that were friends of the Honeymoon Killers. They never released anything on the label, but PK, Peter Kennis, the guy that ran the label, knew all the same people, and he loved it, and he wanted to put out a single, our first single. So while that was coming together, a four-song demo that we'd done of other tunes that ended up coming out later, I sent it into CMJ, and it ended up on the cover of CMJ as like the pick hit demo of the week. And so we had like all the, and like we were saying, like Nirvana had kind of created this whole situation with the, you know, alternative coming into the mainstream and the major labels being interested. So we were getting calls that, the major labels were calling our apartment and asking for demos, and, you know, it was crazy. And we were too raw, or not pretty enough for them, so nothing ever really came of that. But we ended up having a couple other singles come out on Sympathy for the Record Industry and Insipid Records, and some other labels. And it just all started just happening in a sort of a really organic, natural way that seemed like, oh, well, I guess we're onto something. Um, and I think, the music was, I think the music was good, and uh, was it stood out from a lot of the other stuff that was happening in the New York scene at that time, I think, so
Definitely. And in the early incarnation of the New York from Cranks, William was also playing with Gigi Allen and Murder Junkies.
yeah, well, he had started playing with Gigi a little bit before I moved up, and he saw an ad in The Voice and answered it just because he thought it would be hilarious. And he's such a incredible guitar player, especially compared to like the you know cavemen that were also auditioning. So of course he got the gig. And the thing that was funny was that he would audition at the same time that Dee Dee Ramone auditioned.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you know any of this, but they were basically Merle was like, "Oh shit, this guy's like an amazing player, but this guy's Dee Dee Ramone." So it looked like there was going to be, a two guitar thing, but Dee Dee didn't come back after the first audition.
Yeah, there's video of that audition that was in that movie that Todd Phillips put
Yeah,
out.
hated. Yeah, 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 yeah. Funny.
Yeah, interesting. I'm sure Williams got plenty of stories from
Oh yeah.
that what ended up being Gigi's last run,
Yeah, yeah.
for
And
him.
I ended up getting a co-write for a Gigi Allen song. There was a tune that was, an early Cranks song, and I guess I didn't want to do it anymore just because I thought it was sort of a little bit too orthodox of a punk song. I was kind of really trying to kind of focus more on the more bluesy
Mm.
material, that direction. And William asked, hey, we need some songs for this album. Can you mind if I take this song and use that? So it ended up, I mean, of course, like the lyrics are some Gigi Allen
Do you know
type.
what song ended up becoming?
It's a song called "Fuck Off, We Murder."
Hmm.
But that's not the original. It was something else originally.
It went through the GG filter and came out as that.
Yeah, yeah, the very clogged up GG filter. Yeah.
Right, right.
With
That,
I don't want to think what, but
yeah. No, I've known Merle forever. He's a good guy, you know.
yeah,
I got no issues with Merle. He's always been cool to me, and we just had him on another podcast. I co-host with a friend of mine, Drew Stone, New
oh
York
yeah, sure.
Chronicles. We had
Yeah.
Merle on, and I've always thought Merle was an absolute sweetheart, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, he's an interesting cat. I haven't seen him in a long time. I saw him like right when I first moved to the Hudson Valley and the Murder Junkies came through, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So the Chrome Cranks in New York, the gears are spinning. Bob Burt joins the band, starting with album number two. You know, there's a lot of activity with the band, and then eventually, um, this is where I my feet start hitting the ground in some of these clubs. I'm at the age at that point where I'm playing CBs, Coney Island High,
Mm.
and circa 96 to 98, there was definitely a noticeable um like mushroom cloud hitting New York at that point. You had all those like the rock and roll based punk bands coming out. Like My Buddies and Electric Frankenstein were rolling.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
had the Continental had all those bands. There was Jesse and Degeneration, Howie, Lindsay at Coney Island High, the
Yeah.
Continental, the Wetlands, a club that
Yep.
doesn't get mentioned as much as it should. You know, there was a lot happening in New York, and it all sort of blossomed around 96, 97, which coincides with, in my opinion, one of the most definitive records of that era. If someone comes to me and says, "Well, what were the late 90s like in New York?" I'm going to play them Love in Exile.
Oh wow.
I really think that is one of the clearest examples of what New York was at that point in time.
Mm.
Uh, and I know there was a lot buzzing around the band at that point. You had a video on MTV,
Mhm.
a great video for a hot blog and cocktail. I was reading about you guys a lot in magazines. Things were happening. The album is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
It's like, yeah, Chrome Cranks, they're gonna, the next level's right there, and then
Yeah. Yeah.
violence.
Yeah.
So,
Common story, regular story. Yeah, yeah.
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 As Bob was on this as well, and he made a reference to finances being a major contributor to what
Sure.
ground things to a halt for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been doing it hard and heavy for like 5 years straight. I mean, Bob actually joined the band when our first album came out. Um, Most of that album had been Darkroom had a drummer named Phil Rust. But most of that album was Charles Hanson on drums, and then Charles, just basically, we parted ways with him while the album was in the, final production phase, and then Bob joined in time for the tour that we did for that first album.
Mhm.
And there's some of the tracks on the second album, Dead Cool. Bob plays on some are left over from Charles Hanson era. Um, but yeah, we from 90, I guess it was 93, 94 to 98. We didn't we you know we didn't take a break, and we just kind of went at it hard and heavy, and um we weren't we all still had to work day jobs if we could, and didn't um we weren't making money, you know um and I especially Bob he was obviously a veteran at that point, he'd been in Sonic Youth, who went on to be a big band. He'd been in Pussy Galore, which, sort of, was the pre John Spencer Blues Explosion band. And, they were a big act at that time too, compared to us. So, yeah, he was, I mean, that was tough from that. And we were just, I was also overly driven. At that point. So, I mean, I think all those factors, just the fatigue and lack of you know, tangible rewards. We knew we knew we were a great band, and everyone always played fantastically. And we knew a lot of, the right people liked us and all that. But yeah, what are you going to do? I mean, we probably should have just taken a break. And you'll hear that all the time, I mean, Joe Strummer always says, we should have just taken a break. Um, but it what we sort of did take a break in a way because we got back together, after we broke up like 12, 13 years later. But yeah, I mean, it was just what happens to a lot of bands, I think, and it just didn't feel right to just plug different people in. The chemistry was kind of irreplaceable. Uh, and the other guys all went on to play with other bands. Jerry and Bob started Knoxville Girls, and William he had started playing with the Candy Snatchers at that point. And I sort of half-heartedly tried to put something new together, and I wanted it to be something very different instrumentally. Um, but after a couple attempts at some jams, I just was, my heart wasn't really into it.
Mm.
So I walked away for a pretty long time.
I remember 97-ish. I believe it was Alternative Press, one of those, and they had a big feature on Chrome Cranks. And I remember, I don't remember specific, phrases or anything, but the spirit was the writer was just so enamored with you guys. It was like, this is going to be the next thing. And it was just like all this praise, just, justifiable. And then like, there's like these paragraphs just saying, you're the greatest fucking thing since sliced bread and all that. And then it concludes with a quote by you saying, "Yeah, tell that to my landlord."
Yeah, yeah. I remember that article. That was a big thing because that was like, I think our first like really big feature because we were on the cover, I think. We on the
Possibly.
maybe we weren't. No, maybe we weren't. We just had a big spread. I don't think they probably put, some commercial band on the cover to sell magazines, but yeah, it was a big spread. But I remember that was a big thing because we were sort of like, oh, great, finally we're gonna get this big article that's gonna help us a lot. And then I talked to the writer later on about it, and it got edited a lot. And the way what finally went to the pages was all that great stuff you said about the band, but I was the only member that they mentioned by name in the whole thing, which of course, like,
Mm.
other guys didn't really love that, um, which is totally understandable. Um, so it was, and that again, like, I was at the time where we were sort of like, could have, if it didn't happen that way at the best possible time.
Right.
But I mean, obviously that's none of our control, but it was, I remember that was kind of a thing with that article, but certainly very thankful to them for doing it still.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you guys did, as you said, had another run at this, several years later. I think there was another album, right? When you guys got back
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the way that happened was, um, there was a, uh, anthology of kind of rare and unreleased and singles, uh, tracks that I put together, that William and I put together, called Diabolical Boogie. and that came out in 2007. And through that, we kind of all got back in touch.
Mm.
And everything was cool and everything, and it was a kind of a good feeling. And then sort of was like, hey, what do you think about getting back together to do a couple more shows? Like, not any big plan, and everybody was into it. And then word got around about that, and we got invited to play this big festival in France, like paying us crazy money and flying us over and nice hotel and everything. And so we put together let's see, well, we did that show, and then that was great. And um was the idea was like, hey, why don't we make another album? Because we were playing like fantastically. I mean, we were just way better than we were. And just I don't know exactly why, but it doesn't make any sense. But we were was and so I wrote a bunch of new songs, and we learned a couple, you know, covers that sort of, do do in our own way, so that we'd be able to get something together fairly quickly. And it ended up being this album called Ain't No Lies in Blood, which came out in 2010, which I don't know, a lot of people think it's our best album, you know. It's crazy. We recorded the album and did the final mixes in 3 days.
Mm.
And the engineer we and slash co-producer we work with, Kevin McMahon, he was so good and such a fast worker, um, that we didn't have to remix anything. The final mixes were like good to go. His studio was in a barn in the middle of a field out in New Paltz, New York. Totally not the Lower East Side type setting where, fun house. We had our own studio and rehearsal space where we recorded our most of our other records at. And it's our most brutal, noisiest, meanest, you know, fucking wildest record that we, I mean, I don't know. Personally, I lean toward Get Cool. I really like that, or Dead Cool. I really like that one a lot, but it's close. So, and that was with damn, almost a 15-year break.
Mm.
And then we did a couple more tours in Europe, some New York shows after that. But then it was just sort of like, well, we don't want to do any more than this. I mean, I kind of thought we might because we were getting interest from festivals, but it wasn't the right thing for everybody. And that was fine with me. Um, so yeah, kind of a crazy, second act or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's been about 15 years now. You may want to consider,
Yeah, well, I got a new band now, so
Yeah, let's get into that because I was listening to that record yesterday actually, and I'll give you my 10-second review in a moment. But tell me a little bit about what you're doing now, the band and who's in it, because it got some interesting players in the band as well.
yeah, yeah. Well, the Stabbing Jabs is the name of the band. Uh, we've been kind of on hiatus for a little while. Some of it was because of things kind of happened during COVID,
Mm.
and then there's been other stuff. I was working on another book, and so we're planning to put it back together very soon. But yeah, the other members of the band, William from the Cranks is also in the band. Um, and he's obviously on guitar. Uh, and then I'm just singing. I'm not playing guitar. The other fantastic guitar player is Chris Donnelly, who I was in Sluggo with back in the mid 1980s. He also played with Gangrene, the last line of Gangrene. The drummer is Andy Jody, who's the drummer for Barrence Whitfield and the Savages. And we've had few different bass players during our existence. Uh, but we found a good guy now named Kever O'Connor. Um, so yeah, when the way that band came together was I had put together a compilation of early Cincinnati punk stuff tracks from for uh, for the Hozak and Shake It record labels. It was called We Were Living in Cincinnati, and it came out in 2019. And it came out around the same time that one of the clubs that I had booked shows at in the 80s, a place called Murphy's Pub, was basically that they were going to have an anniversary, 30th anniversary weekend of that period when I booked shows. When Nirvana played there and Jesus Lizard played their second show that they ever did there. Um, and since that they asked me if I wanted to MC this event and maybe put together something to special to do for it. And since that Cincinnati comp was coming out around the same time, I thought what might be cool is to put together a cover band doing songs by these earlier Cincinnati punk bands that are on this album as a way to kind of tie things together, the anniversary and the release together. And it's locally oriented. So we originally called the band Harambe's Heroes, which was a reference to the gorilla at the Cincinnati Zoo that got shot and was in the news. And so it was just supposed to be a one-off thing, and it was just such a blast um, that we decided to keep it going with original material.
Mm,
And I had a band in Kingston, New York area where I live now called Young Skulls, which released a single. Um, it must have come out in 2016, somewhere around there. Uh, but that band had broken up, and I had all these songs I'd written for that band, so I just moved them over to the
mm,
Stabbing Jabs, and we recorded this album, self-titled debut album that came out on Beast Records in France, and it came out on Reptilian Records in the US, and very happy with it, and
yeah.
people seem to like it. So
Yeah, it's a cool band. I mean, one thing I really love about it is production wise, it's perfect. It sounds like it could have been recorded in 1982, you know? It's again that no frills we were talking about earlier. It's raw. I mean, I see it very much as kind of the continuation of what you were doing in the past with the cranks, you know?
that's interesting, yeah. Because to me, I mean, there's always going to be some of that in there because it's me and William.
Right.
William and I are in the band, so it's going to have some chrome cranks in it no matter what. It's just, um, but it feels pretty different to me. It's not it doesn't have the kind of as much of a pronounced blues element or the art element that the Chrome Cranks had in a lot of our music. To me, it's kind of more of a return to the a lot of the sound of bands that got us interested in playing music in the first place.
Mm,
Um, which is you know maybe it's not reinventing the wheel, but it feels like a statement to be doing it. It feels like an artistic statement to be doing something that's kind of elemental and sort of, I don't want to say classic sounding, but um, a sound that always just doesn't get old.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I love the thing. When I post a video in the description, I'll put links up people to check it out and get the record and dig on it because it's a cool project, it's a cool record. I'm glad that you're still doing it in this way. I definitely wanted to get into writing with you because, in addition to your history as a musician, you're also a published author. You've done several books at this point. That's kind of my world as well. And you've been a journo for a long time now. You've got years behind you. When did that particular interest start for you?
Well, I done a fanzine when I was in high school, and uh, kind of left that by the side once I started making music myself, really, um, and promoting shows. And then the Chrome Crunks happened, and then when that band broke up, I was sort of left with, well, who am I? Like, what do I do now? And I just had a day job that was not fun. Um, and I I can't remember where I just, I knew writing was something that was always came naturally to me and I was comfortable doing. Um, and so I decided to try going back to school and take some courses. I took it was, I can't remember the name of the course, but it was at Columbia and it was about the angle of it was getting back into writing, basically, sort of reacquainting yourself with creative writing. So I did that, and then I ended up taking a headline writing and copy editing course at NYU that was taught by Paul Schultz. He was the food editor at the Daily News. I'm sure he's not there at this point. Um, but that kind of drilled home the idea that that with the internet, there's all these people writing, but people need help editing. So that was sort of a way to kind of get into things through the side door.
Mhm.
And I ended up getting a gig with a weekly in New Jersey, actually, because I was after the Cranks broke up. I lived in Bergen County for a couple years before I moved to the Hudson Valley, and I got a job at a weekly down there as a copy editor, which is kind of basically a glorified receptionist because there was, the staff was like me and four other people. Um, and then my ex and I decided we wanted to move upstate. And so I started looking for a job up here. And I ended up getting a job as copy editor at the main daily newspaper
Mhm.
up here in Ulster County. And did that for about 3 years. I was commuting for a couple months until we moved up here. Um, and then I learned about an opening at this magazine called Chronogram, which is kind of a arts lifestyle type magazine. Uh, that covers the Hudson Valley. Basically, our area coverage is down to like maybe Westchester up to like Albany, capital region, and into Western Mass and
Mhm.
into Delaware County if you go west. Uh, so I learned about an opening there as an assistant editor, and I got that job. And they knew that music was kind of my bag, so I became, the music coverage became what I did there, and then downsize downsizing kind of happened after a couple years, and they basically put all the arts coverage under the umbrella of the arts editor. So I became the arts editor for the magazine. So it'll be 20 years next year that I've been with Chronogram. Um,
That's great.
yeah, yeah. Let's
That's
see.
great.
So, yeah. And then,
Yeah.
it's online, chronogram.com. Uh, but yeah, so I've been doing that for that long. And yeah, I've done a few books the last couple of years. So
Now, was your Ramones book the first one?
the first one I did was called If You Like the Ramones. Yeah. and that came out in 2014. Um, and that's basically the title is it was part of a series, and the title is sort of self-explanatory. The idea is
Mm,
if you like the Ramones, you should check out all this other stuff. You'll like this stuff too. And the same publisher, Backbeat Books, also launched another series called FAQ, uh, and I did a book about the band,
mm,
uh, which made a lot of sense since I'm live in the area where the band was based, and uh, you know, already know a lot of people that are part of the
right.
lore. So it seemed like a natural thing to do. So that was the second one, and then I ended up getting paired with Richie Ramone to co-write his autobiography, which is called "I Know Better Now," and that came out in 2019, I think.
Mm,
And I just finished a book called Moving in Stereo, which is a biography of Ric Ocasek,
mm.
which comes
Okay.
out in November. Yeah, yeah. And I'm
Okay.
working on another one called Don't Blow Your Mind, and the subtitle is Garage Rock from the Sonics to the White Stripes and Beyond.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Excellent, man.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
right on. It's good to see you're prolific, number one, and number two, you've been, in the game for these many years because, as you know, the industry's changing really goddamn fast.
Yeah.
It reminds me of what the music industry experienced in the early 2000s, when the Napster phenomenon hit and suddenly everything changed. I think our line of work is in that era now. Um,
Yeah, yeah. There's more and more put on the authors to do do the PR and which you know I mean yeah, I was a music promoter back 40 years ago, but um it's kind of not my thing. I mean, I write the thing. I'm happy to do all the interviews that come my way and eager to do them, but as far as like, you know, running some sort of website based on, it's not my thing.
yeah, different skill set and sometimes a different side of the brain, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
Like the writers should be allowed and free to just be the weirdos, and create the thing and not count the beans. I mean,
agreed. Yeah, yeah,
that's the perfect scenario. Doesn't happen. Even if you're in a band, of course, you kind of have to wear multiple hats. But,
sure. Yeah,
as far as writing, I mean, what obviously is kind of the worry is this AI
yeah,
phenomenon. That's not going to get any easier for any of us. No names mentioned, but last year I was working for an editing department for a major international organization. I'll leave it there. I had left that position for another opportunity, which I have now. And 4 months after I departed, the entire department was fired. They're now using AI technology. And we're talking editors who blew my mind. I mean, these guys were, masters, heavily degreed, hardcore, make your mind melt quality editors. And it's just like in one phone call, it was all over. Freelance writers are feeling the same heat, so it's a different era, man.
yeah,
I hope, because the music industry changed, but obviously it still exists. There are still things happening. It moved on. I'm hoping this world that we're in moves on in some new way that, can afford us to make a living, in the long run.
yeah. I mean, I don't know because it's. I mean, it seems like what's gonna make your. I mean, quote unquote product stand out is if it if it has personality, and AI is obviously a decimator of personality.
Yes.
So where's the advantage? I mean, okay, like, you can produce a lot of content quickly, and but what's going to keep people coming back to reading something that's robotic and uninspiring, and by the numbers, and you know I mean, it's we're where we're at, but
Well, I mean, I think it's similar to how people will download something without paying for it.
yeah, oh sure, yeah,
It's the same mentality that will accept whatever bullshit is on a Facebook feed.
yeah,
With someone's stolen photograph and a bunch of bullshit facts about a band or an actor or
yeah,
whatever it is. Oh, I'll like this, and 50,000 likes later, the shit just keeps going upstream.
yeah.
And I'm fortunate. What I do now for a 9 to 5 actually has a strict no AI policy,
Wow.
which I mean, thank God for that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They've built their entire business model on being AI free, and they market it as such. And I think every
That's
day I'm
great.
thankful I have that to do.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you, and I'm hopeful that you're right. That personal touch, that humanity that we do this to achieve will be enough of an incentive to keep, certain careers intact. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Well, just also it's just good for humanity, obviously, just I mean, in terms of what you're consuming, and just how much inspiration can you get to make any kind of like advances in culture, or anything that requires imagination, when you just sort of lapse into this junk food type
right.
content.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. All we can do is do what we do and put good stuff out into the universe, and you know
Yeah.
that'll have some kind of good ripples, and draw at least some level of good things to us. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. At least it's something. We could have nothing or we can have what we do.
Yeah,
So as long
yeah,
as there's something out there, there's a chance, right?
sure.
I wanted to get specifically into the band book with you. Um, and I know you live in band country these days. How familiar were you with the group before you took on that project? Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Beautiful.
Um, I was casually, well, maybe a little bit more than casually familiar, because I've been covering the culture of the area, and obviously there's a lot of the lingering legacy here. So I got exposed to a lot of a lot of what's connected to the band through that. But I mean, I talk about this in the introduction to the book. Was I'd seen the name growing up. Again, these were one of these. I knew a couple of the hits, but these were one of these. The band were a group from the era of a generation before me. Um, so it was big kids music to me at that point. So I didn't really investigate uh, what they were about until in the 80s. I became an insane, like, used record collector, and I would find things in thrift stores in Ohio, which was a great place to find things. And I bought a copy of Music from Big Pink. You know, hey, this is, it was $1 or whatever. I want to know about this. I would buy things that I read about just to check them out, because for that kind of money, um, it was just gave me an education, and So I loved that album. It didn't sound like anything else that I'd heard. And it was a total like Sunday morning record after like a couple of crazy nights at running punk clubs. It was a great record to put on. When I got up, it kind of felt like a familiar friend or a comfortable sweater or tweed jacket or something. And so I held on to it, and I got the second and band, third band album after that, and the other ones. And I got offered, hey, I did the Ramones, If You Like the Ramones book for Backbeat, and they said we're looking for someone to write a book about the band for this FIQ series, and I was like, well, I'm right here, and I want to learn more about them. So that's just kind of how it happened.
Well, having gone through that process, and individually, the members of the band all have incredibly rich histories and very idiosyncratic personalities that were beautiful in their own ways, as you know.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and that's music that's going to live forever, obviously.
Mhm.
I mean, just Levon Helm himself, I mean, that's a star that's going to shine brightly forever. Um, when you went through the process of doing this book, um, what do you believe um, is the band's ultimate legacy? What do you think their greatest impact on music history will ultimately end up being? When people look back, say even decades from now, what do you think their greatest impact was?
Well, I think going back to what you just said a minute ago, and that is that good music is timeless. Um, there's a lot of obviously kind of arcane roots and references in the band's music. Um, a lot of sort of antique type feeling, but at the same time, it feels very alive, and it just kind of feels elemental and ageless. And I think that's the main thing that the band showed people. I mean, that when their first album came out, part of it was what was really striking about was that the photo inside the gatefold, music from Big Pink, is like all the members of the band. They're all, wearing this kind of like, not the psychedelic like or mod out threads at the time, like they're wearing this sort of like really, uh, clothes that kind of hint at or recall, 100 years earlier or almost 100 years earlier. And they're all there with their families.
Mm.
And obviously that was a thing, that came out at a time when there was all this generational strife and, don't trust anyone over 30 and all that. Um, so which certainly that was a healthy thing from the time from what I mean, I was too young to, really get it, but I've certainly experienced my version of it going through life. And that's a healthy thing too, to have some of that. But on the other hand, um, they showed that, it's okay to have uh to retain some stability and a little bit of tradition, just the right amount of tradition, as kind of a grounding, not just in music, but in life. Something that's that's a tether. Um, just sort of like a grounding, a, a little bit of solidity.
Right, right. Um, did you or have you had an opportunity to attend any of the Midnight Rambles
Oh,
over?
sure, yeah, 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 fantastic. You gone to any of those?
No, I haven't
Oh,
yet.
yeah.
And I wanted to go pre-COVID. Then I figured, obviously not the right time. But I was just on the site the other day and noticed they have a bunch of shows booked. So
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you should, man. It's a beautiful spot. Beautiful space and really good vibe. And
Yeah,
yeah,
it certainly seems like, and of course, there's that movie about Levon and that whole phenomenon of those shows. Ain't in it for my health,
yep, yeah,
which is for me like a beautiful but heart-wrenching film.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I saw that in a tiny little indie theater where I live up in New Hampshire. And I remember I saw that movie, man. I had to walk around like 3 or 4 blocks before I got to my car. I just couldn't stop crying, you know?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it
That's
was very bittersweet. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, his he lives on over there. What they got going on, and obviously, he carried things. He carried a certain sensibility through his presence and passed it on to the next one. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was about 2.5 years ago. I was down in Woodstock for a weekend. My partner at the time and I, we went to go see Amanda Palmer at the Colony.
okay, sure, yeah, yeah.
So we spent the weekend down there, and of course, being who we are, like let's go check out the cemetery.
Mm.
And so we went there and said our best to Levon and Rick when we were
Oh,
there.
nice.
You know,
Mm.
what an important band, and
Oh
thank
yeah.
you for
Oh
putting
man.
that document out there in the world to teach others about the magic of that group because that's important stuff. That's true music. I just had Stan Lynch
Oh
doing
wow.
these with me, and we got into the band a bit because
Oh wow.
he's got a group called the Speaker Wars, which sounds like the band, man.
Oh really? Wow.
Yeah, you got to
Huh.
check it out. It's got some
Okay.
moments that are real like up that street,
Wow. Okay. All right.
so
Uh,
that music's going to really last forever.
yeah.
Another band obviously is going to last forever is the Ramones.
Oh yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I interviewed Richie some years ago, so I know he's a character,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
as they all are.
Yeah.
Worked with him extensively getting his book finalized, right?
Yeah. Well, I co-wrote it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That was an adventure. That was fun. Had a lot of fun doing it, and I'm very happy with the way it turned out.
yeah.
Got translated into Spanish last year, published. Yeah.
Wow.
Which, the Ramones had obviously South America, they're huge there. So that was part of the reasoning for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really happy with if I have any of those.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy in that history, as you know, because a lot of people I think sometimes say, "Oh, he was the drummer for a few years, and then Mark came back." But Richie wrote songs.
Yeah,
Um,
yep,
he sang in the
yep.
band. I mean, he was full on in that group for the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Well, Joey said at that time he revitalized the band. I mean, he you know, kind of brought the spark back, you know. And he was the fastest drummer they ever had.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
which is saying
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, 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 definitely. Yeah, well, and also obviously with the New Jersey thing, that's where he's from originally. So that was kind of a natural thing was, like when we first met, decided to meet in person to talk about maybe doing the book. Uh, I suggested that we meet up at Rutt's Hut down in
Right.
in
Yep.
Patterson, and he of course knew exactly where that was and had hung out there when he was a kid too.
Yep.
Um, Went to shows at the Capitol Theater like I did. I mean, he's a little older than me, so he went to some different shows, but yeah, so I had that kind of connection to him, and I knew sort of literally the lay of the land. So it was a natural thing, in that way. And he had been in, I don't know, he had been in this band Ambulance. If you remember that band, they were kind of a power poppy punk band, kind of more on the power pop side of things. And I'd seen the band at the Dirt Club, but I guess it turned out he wasn't with them then. But so, we were probably at some of the same things back. He used to go to shows at the show place in Dover and you know. Um so yeah, it was very cool how we got connected and
What are those hot dogs called at Ruts? The Wellers? Is that what they're called?
there's the Ripper.
The Ripper, yes, the
Yeah, yeah,
Ripper.
yeah, yeah.
I used to work in Nutley years ago for a publisher out there. Um, and it's funny, you'll appreciate this. You know, when you have a business meeting with someone and it's casual, but well, actually it's kind of formal and straight and you're kind of surface level discussing things. You meet in a conference room, right? When you got to talk about the real shit, when you got to make real decisions, you meet at fucking Ruts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
the guy I used to work for was like, we're meeting him at Ruts. Oh shit, it's getting serious,
Yeah,
man.
yeah, yeah. You know, there's a at the counter there's that microphone where they would call people's orders over and Richie said that, when he was a kid they would run up and grab the mic and like, fuck with them and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
he's definitely a cat who came from that neighborhood or grew up there. He just has that, there's no like high gloss with him. If he
yeah.
thinks somebody's an asshole, he'll just say it, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. And he has so many great stories about, well, they're in the book, just about growing up in Jersey at that time and he played in all these cover bands and uh played in polka bands and it's really kind of interesting, unexpected. And then of course like all the insane partying that he did back in the 70s, in New Jersey, being
Yeah,
that being the age where people did that stuff.
right.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I know he had was it a brain aneurysm recently, past couple years? Didn't he?
Richie?
I may be wrong about that. I know he had some sort of like health issue.
Yeah, yeah, he did have something. Actually, yeah, he did. I think it was a heart thing, I think.
Yeah. I think one of his records has like the what do you call it? The scan from the hospital of the
Right, right,
bot
right.
or whatever it was.
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah. But he's out there now. I mean,
Yeah. Well,
he's
good
gotten
for
into
him.
yeah, no, he's great. I mean, he's gotten into acting too, which is something I always thought would be a natural thing for him. He's
Yeah.
kind of got a character kind of look and he lives in LA area and so he seems to really kind of taken off with that. So
Well, more power to him, of course.
yeah, yeah.
And you're working on a Ric Ocasek book or just wrapped up a Ric Ocasek book. Um, and obviously the cars, sensational, his production work.
Yeah.
I mean, Rock for Light, everything from
Yeah.
Rock for Light to Weezer. I mean, the guy was
Suicide. I mean,
Suicide, yes, of
yeah,
course. So
yeah.
he was ground,
Romeo Void. I mean,
yeah, ground
yeah,
floor for a lot of things that would become, significant later on. He kind of had an ear for finding those acts that were doing things interesting, Suicide being, a clear example of that.
yeah, yeah. Well, that
Uh,
was kind of the thing. I mean, really kind of playing, the title of the book, besides obviously that it's, one of their big car songs, Moving in Stereo, was that, he balanced this sort of very commercial side with, being interested in very avant-garde underground
mm,
uh music as well. Um, so, he was many-sided.
mm. Not to ask you to give away any of the store before the book's out, but I am curious, how far does it delve into some of the more domestic issues besides the music? Because I know, in recent years, especially subsequent to his passing, there's been a lot said about that. It seems
Mhm.
that things were rather troubled for.
Yeah, yeah. Don't really get into that very much. If people are coming to it for that, there's, it's not going to be like a field day for for that topic. I wanted to make it mainly about the music, and that's part of the reason because that's one of the things that I got the strongest sense of about Rick was that, he lived for music, and despite the fact that he was in a very commercially successful band, he was always interested in underground music and really vital, boundary pushing music. Um, so I put the focus on that, mainly. And obviously, somebody's life, I mean, for one thing, he's a very guarded person. I mean, even talking to, I talked at length to Greg Hawkes and Dave Robinson from the Cars, and both of them said, like, yeah, we were in a band with him for however long, but we kind of feel like we barely knew much
Mhm.
about him. Um, so yeah, like it was definitely hard as someone that really covered their tracks. But I talked to, I found the drummer from his very first band and interviewed him. I found the couple other musicians that were in bands that he was in before the Cars and interviewed them as well. Talked to Martin Rev from Suicide at length. I talked to Jerry Cassaw from Devo at length. Um, so yeah, I mean, it was there was definitely a lot of insight that was able to gather together that I think hasn't been hit on before. I talked to his sister for a long time, who's never been interviewed before about him, from everything I know. But yeah, with regards to like with regard to the last, uh, that you know domestic scene toward the end of things, his last late wife, Polina Poroskova, wrote her own book, and she talks about that in there. I'll kind of like leave most of that to her.
Yeah, yeah.
So I try to focus on the music. That's
Oh,
I'm a musician too, and
right.
that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that. And I had a feeling that that was the answer I was going to get because, I know myself, I've interviewed, God knows how many musicians. And, when you interview people, especially several times over several years, and you're playing in bands yourself, you're going to interact with people beyond just the sit down interview or whatever. And you get to know people and you hear shit, right? And
Sure.
it's always the interview after the interview, right?
Yeah.
And I always had a rule for myself, unless it's a situation like, for example, Marvin Gaye put out Here, My Dear,
Yeah.
where it's
Yeah.
all about, like how that record came to be. Yeah, then you talk about the relationship because that
Sure. Yeah.
drove the record. You kind of can't do it without it.
Right. Yeah.
It's, I don't particularly care unless it's Frankie Goes to Hollywood or somebody who's explicit about it. I
Right.
don't
Yeah.
care who drops their pants for whom,
Yeah. Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and you're right. I think there's too much of a focus on some of that. The headline grabbing. The family members can certainly say what they wished in their own way.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like my not that it matters so much now in 2025, but my rule from day one was I wouldn't out somebody, for example.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
There's shit that would get a headline, but at what cost? You're going to have
Yeah.
a day or two of attention and ruin somebody's private life?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't, I don't enjoy the feeling of, I'm not a tabloid,
Right.
I'm not into these like sleazy tell-all books. I hate that shit. I mean, he was an artist,
Yeah.
and that's what he would have wanted people to focus on and know about anyway. And he in a lot in sort of to the detriment of a lot of people around him was consumed by his art and expressed himself through the doing of that, and that's who he really was, and that's what I wanted to focus on. And of course, like, yeah, it's a story. You're explaining how one thing led to the next, and you got to get into some things a little bit. but yeah, I mean, I was never interested in that, you know. It's, it's I think it's I mean, yeah, there's some salacious books out there that are great reads, you know. I mean, obviously something like, the Pamela Des Barres book or something, that's what it's about, you know. That's what's, it's up front, you know. And, Hammer of the Gods or whatever, but it's I don't know that to me that's not that interesting. It takes away from what the real legacy and focus should be.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you 100%, and I appreciate that. That needs to be more prevalent in what we do.
Exactly. Now it's all about celebrity culture and Kardashians and these like Bachelor or whatever. It's just like I want to get as far away from that shit as I can. I mean, obviously, yeah, you got to human being and you got to talk about some human things if you're going to tell a story, but I was never interested in spending too much time on that. I was much more interested in the interesting, to me, interesting musical connections with everything that Rick was involved in, and his story of how his own music
Mm.
came together, and so yeah, that's my angle.
That's great, man. That's great. I'm really psyched to check it out. Um,
It
you know,
was it was you know definitely took over my life making it for a while.
as every book you write should, right? Or does
Absolutely.
whether or not you want it to,
Yeah, yeah.
it's how it happens. Um, the books kind of tell us where they need to go, I think. We're just facilitating, but the book's already written. We just got to figure out how to get there.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to look at it. That's very true. That's the way you can't force things. They have to reveal themselves to you
Absolutely.
in terms of the direction, how it flows along. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like with music too. The music will tell you what it needs.
Yep.
That's the great sense of discovery, because I always consider these things already done. I just got to add enough color to the screen to see the syllables. They're already there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Same with the song. But to kind of conclude going full circle, we talked about Sand in the Face and New Jersey hardcore, which is obviously a thread through a lot of my videos on this channel, and a lot of my guests come from that era. And you mentioned, the Sand in the Face archival release, the Cincinnati stuff you did, that came out in archival form.
The second volume, we were living in Cincinnati. Volume 2 is just about to come out on Hozak and
Oh,
Shake It.
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I mean, to that point, there are certain eras that, seem to kind of come around every couple of years, and specifically like with the early Sand in the Face stuff. I mean, I talk to people for this channel and they're like, "Oh, Sand in the Face," like that's one of those bands that are always like, when I mentioned and people are like, "Oh yeah, Sand in the Face." So we're talking 40 plus years after the fact, but I can tell you doing these videos, there's a real affection for not only that band, but that era, and the hardcore scenes in different cities, the Cincinnati thing, and the New York hardcore obviously is still
Sure.
massive, and it's still the
Yeah.
bands from then. What do you think it was about that era and that style of music that has maintained such relevance? Really, almost half a century later.
Hmm. Well, I think I can only speak from my own experience. It's where a lot of us actually started. It got us started playing music. Um, because if we were a certain age, it was when we picked up an instrument and could start playing like super simple uh songs, and also it was we were reacting to the 70s had happened and had uh the was sort of had become the hollow, unfulfilled promise of the 60s. And then so we sort of grew up at an age when there was this whole like there was the whole like this legacy of what came to be called classic rock and FM rock, where it was like, oh, this is like wholly like Mount Olympus type music, which is from a little bit of an earlier era that doesn't really have much to do with our generation. And at the same time, there's also concurrent with that this whole uh, sort of snooty musical elitism that made punk happen in the first place, where like, oh, you know, if you were really cool, you would listen to Yes or Kansas or whatever, this sort of, these and like, these are real musicians and all, this is what you should aspire to. And at the same time, you're like, well, this is some, classical wannabe like deep bullshit that has nothing to do with me, doesn't have anything to do with growing up in the suburbs and having this angst that yeah, and this anger about being an outsider and not being able to express myself and assert my presence. Like these people are walking around in fucking flowing robes with dry ice coming up around their ankles. Just, what the fuck does that have to do with me, And it was just sort of this feeling of like I can actually go and do something and make something happen. And obviously that had kind of come to the really in existence with punk, but we were a little bit younger and we were in the suburbs and we were left to our own devices and we came out with our own flavor of that. Um, and I think that feeling is something that you have when you're doing that is something you go back to time and time again to get you to the next place you want to be or to get you to create and make the next uh the next version of something that feels real and says something. So hopefully that's something that stays with you, and I think that's why we come back to that time. And I think that even people that were not there and maybe a little bit younger, they get a little bit of that sense, and that draws them to it as well. Hopefully they go off and do their own thing.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well said, well said. Peter, it's been awesome having you on, man. I'm glad we finally connected for this. Thanks to all the people who wrote me suggesting Peter as a guest. You were absolutely right, as I knew you
Oh,
would be.
well,
Uh,
thank to them and you, of course, too, from me. That's great.
Absolutely. And I'm really looking forward to the Rick book. And I really, really enjoyed talking to you from the writer side of the fence. I don't get to do that too often. So,
Yeah, yeah, no, that's always good. I mean, I'm lucky to know quite a few writers in my area that I'm friends. Tony Fletcher and Dan Epstein and Holly George Warren and Will Hermes. I mean, I'm surrounded by some great music focused writers, and talking to them is always it's a unique treat.
awesome. Well, my very best to all of them as well. We're swimming upstream in this world, man.
Yeah, yeah.
And all the best to everyone and all the best to you moving forward. And it's just been a real pleasure. And my door is always open in the future. If you ever want to come back, I'd love to have you back.
Oh, I'd love to. Thanks. And yeah, sure, man. Anything I can help out, like come to me.
Right on. Thanks so
All right.
much.
All right, man.